It's pretty easy to understand the Pokemon that are the most like us. The ones that are mammals, the ones that eat like us, the ones that have biological functions that we recognize. Even if you don't know the specifics of how to care for and raise them, you can make a few general guesses. You know they'll need food and water. You know that extreme temperatures probably aren't going to be good for them. You know that they do best in a specific natural environment. Which is what makes interacting with and raising Pokemon like Magnemite and its evolutions so confusing and intriguing. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the electrical magnet Pokemon Magnemite and its evolutions Magneton and Magnezone. Magnemite is a very unique looking Pokemon. It's a foot tall and weighs only 13 pounds, despite its body being made of metal. The center mass of the Pokemon is a metal sphere that has one large eye on it with no iris, just a small pupil in the center. On either side of the sphere are large magnets with their ends colored red and blue, corresponding to the positive and negatively charged sides. Think of the plusle and minus colors. As well, there are 3 screws that stick out of the central sphere, 2 below the eye that stick forward, and 1 that comes out of the top, pointed straight up. Overall, it's a very unconventional body plan. And then its evolution Magneton is 3 Magnemites stuck together. I'm not kidding, that's really what it is. Magneton is composed of 3 different Magnemite that have become linked in body and mind through strong magnetic forces. And I mean strong enough that it actually heats up the surrounding air and messes with electronics, which is one of the major issues with keeping these Pokemon. Plus, you would think that these guys would just weigh the same as 3 Magnemites put together, but no. A Magneton shoots way up in weight, now being 132 pounds and being 3 feet tall from top to bottom. And that's not the end of it. When Magneton is exposed to a special magnetic field that's given off by certain places, like Mount Coronet or Chargestone Cave in Unova, their molecular biology changes and they become a Magnezone. Magnezone greatly shifts the appearance of the line, now having one big body again that's shaped somewhat like the old tales of UFOs. It has a saucer-like body with 1 large red eye in the center, and 2 eyes on either side of its body situated on bulges that come out of the sides. They also have the signature horseshoe magnets under the 2 side eyes, as well as 1 in the back of the main body that looks a lot like a tail. Lastly, there's a yellow antenna that sticks up from the center of the top of the Pokemon, which many people claim that the Pokemon uses to receive and possibly send signals. In all, it's a very strange and odd Pokemon and a very strange and odd line, really deserving of being thought of as different than most biological Pokemon out there. But, who knows? After we go through the guide, maybe you'll figure out that these strange beings are actually the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. So the major issue that you need to consider with these guys is they're dangerous to keep around electronics. The magnets that are part of their bodies produce such massive amounts of electromagnetic radiation that anything that gets too close to them essentially gets fried, like you just set off an electromagnetic pulse. As well, they feed on electricity and local electromagnetic fields, so they will actively search out any major places where there's a lot of power and try to drain it dry. For that reason, these guys are oftentimes illegal to have near any large settlements outside of their Pokeballs. Only professionals like gym leaders, scientists with degrees, and people that have been specifically trained to handle these Pokemon and the energy they emit are able to get the needed paperwork to have these Pokemon near large population centers. Really, we should be thankful that Pokeballs are shielded from this kind of energy, or there wouldn't be any way for us to effectively control these guys. So if you are going to house these Pokemon outside of their Pokeballs like we've been doing in this series, you'll need to build them a place that, 1, is far away from any town or city, and 2, can contain all of the energy that these guys will be putting off. The best way to contain these guys and still meet their needs is to build them a building that will not only provide them with electrical power that they need, but will also shield the surrounding environment from them. To accommodate this, you'll be constructing a building consisting of 3 layers. The center of everything should be a layer of lead that's about an inch thick. This is the best material to absorb all the electromagnetism coming from these Pokemon. Then, because you don't want just a building built out of exposed lead, it needs to be encased on all sides by strong, thick concrete, at least a foot thick on all sides. This will stop your Pokemon from being able to damage the lead, while also keeping the lead from seeping into the surrounding environment. After all, nobody wants lead to suddenly start showing up in their groundwater. On one side of the building, you should have a thick metal door, lead core surrounded by stainless steel, to allow you access into the enclosure in case something needs to be fixed or one of the Pokemon has to be removed. Also, small porthole-like windows can be set into the sides of the building so that you can look in and see the Pokemon if you want. But the glass will need to be at least half an inch thick, and you will need metal shutters that cover the window when you aren't using them, as leaving the window open will just make the rest of the protections pointless. For the inside, you'll need a bit of lighting so that the Pokemon and you can see, meaning that you should install a recessed lighting that can be shielded from the Pokemon, as they'll try to suck the power out of them if they can get to them. And then you'll be installing 2 different kinds of lightning rod into the walls. One kind will be inactive, just grounded into the walls themselves and not tied into any power grid. This is to absorb any stray electricity that comes off of the Pokemon. You don't want any damage to come to the walls from any excess lightning that these guys give off, so the inactive lightning rods will act to redirect and harmlessly disperse that energy throughout the wall. The second kind of lightning rod is actually going to function as the opposite. These rods are going to be tied into some sort of electrical grid, meaning they're going to be powered and electrified. This means you do need to be careful around these ones. After all, I hear that being electrified doesn't really feel that great. But it also means that these can function as a feeding source for your Pokemon, providing your Magnemite evolution with the exposed power source that they need. As you clearly see, these guys don't really need the same things that many biological species would. Like, they don't have muscles that need to constantly be used or have to move around overly much. So they need less space than a biological Pokemon of comparable size and weight. That doesn't mean that they won't appreciate more space, but the minimum for a Magnemite is about 10 feet by 10 feet on the bottom and about 10 feet tall. Remember, these Pokemon float around, so vertical space is very important for them just as much as horizontal space. Magneton will need a bit more space thanks to its increased size, now needing its space to be a cube with 20 feet on all sides. And lastly, Magnezone doesn't need much more vertical space than Magneton, but it will need more space to simply move around, so you could keep the 20-foot high ceiling while expanding the walls to 30 by 30. That's a pretty good sized building, larger than some apartments in major cities. But keep in mind that it's a fully evolved Pokemon, and I always say that fully evolved Pokemon take a lot of room and a lot of resources. Lastly are the Pokemon that can be housed with them. The Pokemon of this line aren't that aggressive and tend to only fight when they're the ones that have been attacked first. So theoretically, anything that doesn't start a fight and can stand the electromagnetic field that they give off would be a good match. But it really depends on what can live in the room with them. We didn't exactly make this thing comfortable for most biological species. Perhaps some of the cave-dwelling steel types could stand it, like the Aeron line, but even then, it probably wouldn't be comfortable for them. Your best bet is to stick to other non-biological Pokemon, things like the Clink line or the Voltorb line. The last one is oftentimes found in the same place as Wild Magnemite, but they do tend to explode, so be careful there. And of course, other Magnemite evolutions are a yes. Just if you house multiple Magnemite together, then you should fully expect them to evolve into a Magneton eventually. Availability. As I'm sure you can tell about these guys, they don't really spend their time in forests or on the beach. No, they tend to congregate around places where there's a lot of electrical power flowing about. So places like the power plant in Kanto, the Verbank complex in Unova, and plenty of large cities like Humalau, Goldenrod, and Levincia. Really, anywhere there's a lot of people and a lot of power either being generated or used, then you should be able to find these guys. The only region that doesn't have a population of these guys for some reason is mainland Galar, but even then, they appear on the Isle of Armor, so... And because of power drawing them in like a lure, they are very numerous in those areas. If you go to those areas, then you will very quickly find a Magnemite and even a Magneton. The only one of the evolutionary line that you might have some trouble finding would be Magnezone. Thanks to the fact that it needs a special magnetic field to even reach this evolution, the only places that you would find these guys are in places that have that magnetic field. These are places like Mount Cornet in Sinnoh, the vast Pony Canyon in Alola, Chargestone Cave in Unova, and, funny enough, the place where they built the power plant in Kalos. How's that for foreplanning? However, none of these places have a native Magnemite or Magneton population, meaning that the only way you could get a wild Magnezone is if the Magneton was transported there through some other means. Which is usually where I say that a breeder would be the only way that you could get that Pokemon, but there are no breeders for this Pokemon line. I mean, they have no gender, they have no reproductive ability, they aren't biological in any sense of the word. Trying to set up a breeding facility for them would be pointless. Really, the people that you want to get a hold of are professional trainers. Someone that you can hire to go out, catch the Pokemon you want, and then, if you want a Magnezone, they can take the Pokemon to that place for you to evolve it. Aside from that, you might be able to find collectors out there that might be willing to separate with one of their Pokemon, but either way, it's going to be a long, roundabout method of getting them. Catchability. I'm not going to say that they're difficult to catch, as if you prepare for them, then they should be a fairly simple catch. It's just that the preparation is a lot. One is that you need to find a way to protect yourself and any electronics you bring with you from the Pokemon. That means getting special containers for your phone, watch, car keys, anything that might get fried by being near these guys should be kept safely inside some kind of container made for that purpose. The only thing that you don't have to worry about are Pokeballs. As well, bring a Pokemon with the Lightning Rod ability. Electrike and Manectric are perfect for this. That way, if the Magnemite evolution decides to attack you, then it won't work. If you don't have access to that specific ability, then you're looking to bring either a fighting type or a fire type, as they'll be super effective against the Magnemite evolution. And because you want this encounter to be as short as possible, I'm going to recommend that you only bring Ultra Balls, even for just a Magnemite. Yes, they are more expensive, but it raises your chances of catching the Pokemon on the first throw. Getting these guys is all about how fast you can catch them. However, this is where I should mention that you are going to need a permit to have these guys. Due to the fact that they could easily cause issues with things like phones and emergency services, you'll have to take a test and get a permit to show that you can handle these Pokemon responsibly. That's why the people that usually have these Pokemon are people like engineers, electricians, scientists, and gym leaders. So before you even set out to catch one of these guys, be sure that you get the required paperwork to do so first. Care. I honestly don't have much to say here. This might be the shortest care section yet, and I can't imagine one being simpler. After all, you don't have to worry about feeding these guys. They feed on electricity, and that feeding method is built into their enclosure, so no daily food meals. Though, speaking of food, you should make sure that they will always have ready access to that electricity. I know there are plenty of places around the world that experience weather extreme enough to cause blackouts and power outages. Heck, back in Unova, we would sometimes get snowstorms that are rough enough to knock the power out for 3 or 4 days at a time. And those are the kind of storms that I'm talking about. If the power goes out for longer than a day, it could lead to your Pokemon running low on energy. This can lead to multiple effects, such as being unable to float, unable to produce any electricity of their own, being unable to communicate with each other or you, and possible injury if it goes on long enough. The best way to sidestep this whole situation is to have a backup power source that you can activate when the main power source is offline. Something along the lines of a generator that people usually get for these major weather situations that I mentioned. That way, even if your power is out for a long period of time, you won't have to worry about the Pokemon on top of everything else that you'll be worrying about in a time like that. Another thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the care for these guys is the fact that they're really friendly Pokemon. I know during the rest of this guide, I've kind of made these guys out to be terrible Pokemon that ruin electronics and can destroy electrical infrastructure, because they can, but it's important to understand that they don't do it out of malice. It's just how they are. It's like how you can't take a Slugma into a forest without starting a forest fire, or how a lot of the oceanic water types need water to survive. These guys are just unfortunate enough to need electricity in a world where we power our society with electricity. And by all accounts, when you actually spend time with these guys and get to know them and build a bond with them, then they are very friendly and loyal. The issue comes with how you build that bond. The normal method is to use food to build a bond between you and the Pokemon, but you can't hand feed electricity to these guys. That wouldn't end well for you. So for these guys, instead you'll have to go much slower, and just try to get it used to you being there through exposure. Spend time inside the enclosure, without electronics unless you want them fried, and just exist in the same space as your Pokemon for a while. Try getting closer to them, and if they allow that, then try to interact with them. Speak to them gently, pet their metallic shells, I guess. Try to be soft and approachable. The nice thing about Magnemite and Magneton is that they're not prone to aggression, so you don't have to worry about them zapping you unless you threaten and attack them first. Magnezone can be kinda finicky. It's the only one of the evolutionary line that's semi-territorial, so it might try to give you some kind of intimidation display to try and drive you off, but really, it's just like the rest of the line. As long as you don't make any aggressive moves towards it, then it should calm down with you being there over time. Then, once they allow you to touch them and handle them, a good thing that you can do to gain their trust is to polish them. These are our first steel types in the series, but a common thing for many of them is that polishing them with a metal polish can make them feel very good. It's kind of like massage oil to them. It will make them feel good, it'll make them look good, and it'll help that bond you're building grow. And the nice thing is, since steel types are immune to any kind of poison, you don't have to worry about the metal polish poisoning them. Once you've reached a level where the Pokemon are actively coming towards you and interacting with you, then you can start doing more, like giving them commands and start training them for battle, or for shows, or even just for more human interaction. From that point on, it's really up to you. And the last thing we should talk about when it comes to care for these guys is your own safety, as there are a few ways that you or the Pokemon could hurt you, whether by accident or not. One good example of this is someone that has metal inside their body, whether that be braces or fillings in your teeth, a metal body part like a hip, or possibly something along the lines of a pacemaker. The strong electromagnetism that these Pokemon give off and use to float could cause problems with these devices, even causing them to malfunction or heat up. So be aware that could be a problem if you have one of these things and you're looking at getting one of these Pokemon. The last thing you want is to have the enclosure perfectly set up, finally get your Pokemon, and then have your braces along with your teeth yanked right out of your mouth thanks to the strong magnetism. So always be aware of yourself and the abilities of these Pokemon, be they active or passive. Cost. Well, I could say the cost of the food would be nothing. After all, they don't eat berries or meat or anything that would be considered food to us. But that wouldn't be totally honest, now would it? They do feed just on electricity, which, unless you're able to produce your own through electric-type Pokemon or solar panels or something of the like, you have to pay for your electric. Meaning you will be paying for all the power usage that feeding these guys entails. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any exact numbers on how much that would be, as many different regions and cities charge at different rates, but from what I found, anywhere from the moderate to the high category is possible. The Pokemon itself can swing from really cheap to kind of expensive. It can be cheap if you decide to go out and catch one yourself, which is the main way that people get these things. So you could have one for the price of a Pokeball. But if you don't live near a space where they congregate, or the places are off limits in regard to power plants, then getting one through a professional trainer or even a collector could make the price shoot up to the moderate category or even the high category for the later evolutions. The Enclosure is going to be the most expensive part of this as usual. The fact that you're going to need that much concrete to make the walls, plus all of the lead insulation, the lightning rods, and all of the electrical shielding, it'll easily drive this enclosure up to the very high category. And for the larger enclosures for the later evolutions, it'll be even further into the very high category. Conclusion. The way I see it, these guys are a mixed bag. On the one hand, they are so super friendly and easy to work with and get along with, and just taking their attitude and ease of training and care, I would say that they would make great beginner Pokemon. But then you have to take into consideration how they affect electronics, and how their variability can cause problems just by them being around. Plus, their enclosure isn't exactly beginner-friendly, so it's this strange dichotomy of wonderfully simple and dangerously complex. I would say that a professional should be the ones that are keeping these Pokemon. But as long as that professional is supervising and they're there to keep anyone else safe, then these could be the perfect Pokemon partner for anyone. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we cover the wild duck Pokemon Farfetch'd from the Kanto region. Have a wonderful night, everyone.